Good afternoon or good evening, everybody. It's Monday, July 26, 2021. My name is Jose Romero, one of the reference librarians slash adult services librarian. Today we are presenting Helen Consiglo. Did I pronounce that correct?
It's pronounced concilio.
Okay, I'm using the Spanish version. Helen comes from the Fair Housing Council in Bergen County. And the theme here is, have you been denied housing opportunities? Talking about housing, just for a second here, my sister just bought a house. And she just posted it on Facebook, but it did take her a while to find something. And everything that goes with it in terms of trying to find a house, because I know she stated some things about how difficult it might be to find a house. So I'm very interested in getting Helen to start. So Helen, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Jose. Thank you very much. And thanks for inviting me and our staff at Fair Housing. So a little bit about me and my career at Fair Housing. I've been there for just about 20 years. I started off back in the 90s as an investigator, as we use per diem investigators. So our program basically is funded through HUD, Housing and Urban Development. And the founder and director of the program is a woman by the name of Lee Porter. And Lee Porter is now, she's 94 years old. She comes to the office pretty much every day. And she founded this organization as a result of her own difficulties in purchasing a home in Bergen County. So back in probably around the late 60s, early 70s, she and her husband and their children she's African American, and they wanted to buy a home in Bergenfield, New Jersey, and they were met with a lot of resistance. And there were petitions that went around the neighborhood, and there was protests from neighbors, and neighbors came up to them and said, "We don't want you here," things like that. It was to the point where they actually had to have police protection so that no one was actually, physically harmed. But the experience obviously left her, it was a very devastating, traumatic experience for her and her children. But she prevailed, and she was able to get the house. But what happened was, initially, she was shown a few houses, and Bergenfield borders Teaneck, and Teaneck has always been a very integrated town. So I think that at the time what happened was she was shown houses only in Teaneck, but somehow she became knowledgeable about this one particular house in Bergenfield, and that was the one she wanted. So at the time, there was a grassroots organization, very small group of people, and they were trying to get open up the neighborhoods more to people of color. So she was in touch with this particular organization, and what they did was they had what they call testers. So they had a couple of people pose as prospective tenants or purchasers, and through this whole entire process, it was revealed that the seller and the realtor were refusing to rent to her family based on her race. So it became a legal issue. And as I said, they prevailed, and she was able to get her home. So this grassroots organization the people who were working at this, it wasn't even a paid job or anything. There were people that were working on it just as a volunteer. They asked her if she would like to open up an office and work, in this organization. So that's what she did. And she's been there, I have to say, since 1970, maybe even before that. So as a result of that, and after many years, the Housing and Urban Development, they decided that they were going to fund a project, and they funded this what they call the FIP program, and the FIP program is Fair Housing Initiative Program, and what the program is they fund us to do what they call audit testing. So what we do, or what I do, is we're an enforcement agency. So what I do is if an individual called me and said, I can't find a home, or I'm trying to find a home and I feel like I'm being discriminated against, what I do is I set up an investigation, and I go have people go out and pose as renters or purchasers, and come back with all of the information, and then from there we could decide on whether or not this is really a discrimination issue, or it could be other things as well. So that's basically what I do. That is what I do, and I'm the project manager for this particular program. So, and it comes, as I said, it comes through HUD, and it's all federal funding, grant money. And as a result of the work, actually, I just settled a big case in Bergenfield, coincidentally, for an apartment complex that were discriminating against African Americans. They just didn't want African Americans there, and it was, ironically, they only wanted Hispanic people. And the agent in the office, when we sent in Hispanic testers, she was extremely accommodating to them. But when we sent in Black testers, they barely got a hello. So that we just recently settled that complaint. So that's a little bit about our organization and what we do. We also do pre-foreclosure mortgage counseling. And there's a huge need for that now, the pre-foreclosure mortgage counseling. And that's stemming back from probably 2008, when all of that mortgage, when all the Fannie Mae, all that collapsed and all of those mortgages were called in. So we've been doing mortgage counseling. So we allow people, we work with the banks, and we assist people with doing a modification for their mortgage. And so that's those are our two core programs, the enforcement program and the mortgage program. Does anyone have any questions?
Let me, I have a question in terms of how far does your organization go? I mean, you talk about Bergen County. Do you also look at other counties in New Jersey?
Yes, we statewide. We do the whole state of New Jersey. So we're funded to do testing as far south as Cape May. We go to, as a matter of fact, I'm working on an investigation as we speak for HUD that's down in Cumberland County. We had an allegation of discrimination. It was a home purchase. But what might be noteworthy to mention, and I guess this would be a good thing, the complaints for discrimination based on race have gone down considerably. Most of our complaints now are based on disability. That seems to be the big one now. most of it is disability, and a lot of it is also for rental assistance. That's also another one. Excuse me. So that's the other one is the rental assistance. A lot of the apartment managers don't want to accept rental assistance. So
Why would that be? Why is it that if you're getting the money from the government, I guess, right? That owners particularly do not want to accept that particular payment?
the rate of complaints that are solely based on acceptance of rental assistance outweighs all of our other complaints. It supersedes everything else that we receive. The only thing about those complaints is they're not covered by the federal government. We have so the federal government has what's called Title VIII, which is the Federal Fair Housing Act, and it's under Title VIII. And under Title VIII, the protected classes are race, national origin, disability, gender, familial status, religion, and gender. Okay, so under those categories, it's color and race and national origin. And under the New Jersey law against discrimination, though, they have probably about 13 protected classes. A lot of those protected classes have been incorporated to protect the LGBT community and the transgender community. And they also have ancestry in there. They have marital status, and they have Section 8. And so we are not funded to do Section 8 because that comes under the state. So we only could do complaints for Bergen County, because we are given some money through the Bergen County's community development program to do a small amount of testing. Does somebody have a question?
I have a question, actually. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, yes.
Perfect. Thanks for your time. Two questions I have. How does someone work with your team if they're running into a scenario where they it may feel like discrimination? How would someone start that conversation? And then what's the the turnaround time if you were to actually go through an investigation? Is that something that takes weeks, months, years?
Well, when you say an investigation, are you referring to if somebody has a complaint?
Yeah, so if you go through the process looking for housing and then you feel as though maybe you were looking for a rental unit and you weren't shown the right property, or it just felt like something was off as you were going through the process.
Yes. Well, what we would do is, for instance, if you were looking for an apartment and let's say you felt that you were not shown the apartment, or you felt that they had more than what really shown to you, or something of that nature, or getting back to you, then you could call.
Excuse me, Helen. Glenn?
Yes.
Yeah.
Glenn, there's a lot of background noise. We can't
Yeah,
really.
that's my phone's on mute. That's actually one of the other attendees that has sound coming from him.
Oh, I see. All right. Thank you, Glenn. All right, go ahead. I'm sorry, Ellen.
No, that's okay. So, so essentially what you would do is call our office and we would do an intake, take the information. And then generally, if it is a complaint based on race, then I generally would set up a test, and I would get a Caucasian person and an African-American person, almost with identical credentials, and very similar in every aspect except race. And that's how we would do a comparison. And then we would go from there. So like for instance, the one that we did in Bergenfield, that happened to be an African-American female who she basically said that the agent in this particular complex basically was just giving her the runaround. And she said initially she was getting the information, but then when she followed up, the woman wasn't calling her back. And then she on her own had a friend of hers call who was Hispanic. And then when her Hispanic friend called, the woman at the office was, all of a sudden she was getting all this information. So she did their own investigation in a way. Now that particular case, by the time we finished with the investigation and made the settlement, it was over a course of about 3.5 years before it was settled. And
Wow.
that's usually how it would go. Some even a bit longer than that.
Okay.
That
Thanks for
actually
that insight.
settled fairly quickly.
But Helen, let me
That
ask you a
settled
question.
quickly because in that particular case, it settled quickly because the respondents knew that the evidence was overwhelming, that they were discriminating. And the owners of the apartment complex didn't want to go to court. So they were willing to settle.
Wow.
Yeah. It was pretty blatant in that case. Most of the time, it's not quite that blatant.
Right.
So,
Glenn, are you looking for a home? Have you had discrimination? I don't know.
Can you hear me? I go on.
Yes,
and
I can
off
hear
of
you,
mute.
Glenn. Yes.
Perfect. So I am looking for a home. I currently live in West Orange. Before we moved here, we were looking at an apartment over in South Orange. And at one of the places, we interfaced with a rep from the building online over email. And then I let them know which unit I was interested in because I saw it available online. And then we basically scheduled time to come see it in person. And then basically as soon as we got there, he's like, oh, well, that one's not available anymore. I can show you this other unit. And then we saw the one unit and it wasn't anything like what I was expecting. It did not look like the one we were looking for. So then I said, are there any other units available? And he basically said that he didn't have the keys for any other units. And this is like a large complex. And at that point, I just basically said, hey, we don't want to be here, right? After you don't feel welcome going through that process. And when you know the resources you have available as you go through this process is one thing, but as we went through that, we weren't really aware. So it's nice to have sessions like these to know that there are organizations that can kind of help.
mhm.
But we're looking, so we found housing since then, right? And now we're looking to move actually to the Fort Lee area. And if you've been to Fort Lee, you know Fort Lee is not the most diverse town in New Jersey. And I'm not that I'm expecting it to happen then, but I was just wondering what to look out for in resources that are available if something like that does happen at any point in the future.
Helen, isn't Fort Lee more Asian?
I would say it's predominantly Asian.
Yes,
Oh.
it is, definitely.
Predominantly, yeah. Yeah, I definitely would say that. Yeah. If you go through Fort Lee and go through like the town, a lot of the signs in the windows have, they're in, to tell you the truth, I'm not sure if it's Korean or if it's Japanese. I was always under the impression that it was a high Japanese area, but for some reason I think it may have crossed over to a lot
Yeah.
of Korean.
I think in the 80s it was more Japanese, and now it has crossed over to more being a bit more Korean.
Yeah.
And I know that I mean, obviously none of this is on paper, but I know some towns court a certain type of demographic. And
Mhm.
I mean, as we go through this process, I just wasn't sure. And I know a lot of the rentals that are up there also go through this process of, they only really offer a lot of theirs with like a realtor, where you have to pay a realtor fee. I guess it's
Yeah.
like 1 month of the rent.
Yes.
And I don't know what the complexities are there either. So I just know it's a separate process than working directly with the building.
Right.
A lot of the the whole rental market has changed considerably from, I guess, like when I first started working at Fair Housing, which was just about 20 years ago. The formula for renting was 1 week's salary would had to be equivalent to what the rent was. So you had to be able to pay the rent with what you earned just in 1 week. That was what the formula was. But now it's completely changed. And now you have to have a certain income. So especially in the upper scale type apartment complex, and even in the lower end apartments too, just an ordinary garden apartment that, that was built maybe like in the 70s or something, that nothing elaborate, just, just your basic little garden apartment. You have to have an income of, I don't know, maybe 50 something thousand. And of course you have to be working, which is actually against the law, because they're not supposed to discriminate as to whether or not you're employed. But they do want, so in other words, if you go for an apartment and you're not working, but your income is, let's say, from Social Security, and let's say you're getting Social Security and alimony, or Social Security and child support, or maybe you're getting unemployment. They're supposed, as long as that income is legal, they're supposed to factor it in. But a lot of apartment complexes won't even consider an application if your income is not based on actual earnings rather than on, just income. And the credit score now is huge. Everything is a credit score. And those are legitimate, acceptable business practices from apartment complexes. I had a woman who called me today, and this was a new one for me even. She said that she lives in an apartment complex in Flanders, which is out in Morris County. And if she's only 1 day late with the rent, just 1 day, they're charging her $140 fee.
Oh my God.
Yeah, it's unconscionable.
But Helen, let me ask you this, in terms of, go back to Glenn's Fort Lee situation.
Mhm.
I mean, if it's predominantly Asian, you're
Mhm.
saying that Asians also discriminate, other minority groups discriminate too?
Actually, I have to say, it must discriminate the most. Yeah,
Wow.
yeah. Yes. What I find is, for the most part, the people who discriminate the most are people who are also in protected classes. Yeah. So if you have, let's say a perfect example is in Palisade Park, which is probably about 100% Korean.
Yeah.
They'll discriminate against any other group of people. They don't want white people. They don't want Black people. They don't want Spanish people. They don't want Hispanic people. They only want Korean people, and they advertise in Korean. And what they tend to do is just stay within their own little core group, so they'll only advertise in a Korean paper, or, things like that, or, these little, like in Wallington is all Polish. So they tend to stick with the Polish community, or Garfield is all Italian. And so they stick with the Italian people. That, that seems to be the way it works a lot. But the majority of the people who discriminate are people who are foreigners. They're not born here.
Oh, my God.
They're foreigners. Yeah.
No, I tell you the truth. I mean, I'm Hispanic, and we grew up in a tenement, and it was a good tenement. It was good, fine families that lived in the tenement, and thank God that the superintendent, she was Irish American, and she accepted all. She accepted all. We did have a very mix of a lot of different groups. But I say to myself, what do we do? And I mean, you figure people will be more educated and I mean, being New Jersey, being so diverse.
Yes.
How is it that still goes on? Just
It goes on, but it's, as I said, the incidents, like I say that it does go on. But most of the complaints I get, like I said, are mostly for the emotional support animals. But it just so happens that the ones that I do get a lot are the owners of like 2-family houses. That's a big one. 2-family house, like let's say someone comes here from Poland or Russia or I don't know, a Middle Eastern country. And they say, well, we're going to buy a 2-family house. We're going to make an investment. They seem to discriminate, not so much on race, as much on with the Section 8. They do not want Section 8. They come over here, I guess, and they hear, well, don't take Section 8 because people who have Section 8 are going to ruin the house. They're going to destroy your apartment. There's a very negative connotation to people who have Section 8. So that I think, it kind of, I think it invokes like a low class of people, somebody who's got Section 8. Even though the people who have Section 8 are, they're lovely people, they just don't have a lot of money,
Yeah.
But it's a negative connotation that, years ago, if somebody had Section 8, that's it. Your house is done. It's ruined. It's, but that seems to be the way things are trending now.
Wow.
Yeah. But
there was
money, a lot of it is money. The gap, I find that the gap is more money than any other factor.
Helen, when I was looking for a home, because about 20 years ago, I was living in Weehawken, and my kids, we were living in I was lucky, I was fortunate because the house, it was a 2-family house, and we had to move because Weehawken got to the point that we just couldn't afford it there. But we were living in this house, so we moved to Bayonne. And I at the time a very big family. There was 7 of us, and we scoured a good part of the state to look for anything. But you know how difficult it is for any homeowner to decide, I'm going to take 4 kids.
Yes.
And we moved into an apartment that was, the previous tenant was a Section 8. She was a single mom with, I think, 3 kids, but her house was just, the owner just got tired. She didn't want to deal with it.
Yes.
But the thing is, while looking for apartments, you hear stories of, and I think maybe, Glenn, that might be important. Have you visited Fort Lee?
Yes, I'm actually pretty familiar with the town.
Okay. Well, that's good then, because I visited Clark, New Jersey. Helen, are you familiar with Clark?
I am familiar with Clark. We actually did a very big investigation in Clark about 20 years ago. And it was actually, we did it through the Justice Department. I'm sorry, I had to get up for a second.
No, that's okay.
The Justice Department, they wanted to conduct a whole series of tests in Clark. And we handled the testing, but we didn't get the results. We had to give the results to the Justice Department.
Helen, let me ask you a question.
Sure.
Was it true about a cross burning in Clark, New Jersey?
I don't know. I never heard that.
Yeah, because the thing
That
is
I
that
don't know.
now, that's what would happen when we were looking for an apartment. You know, you would go to these places looking for the apartment, and then they give you stories of the history of discrimination towards an African American or Hispanic or anybody. It didn't matter.
Right.
It was,
Right. I don't know, but it was funny because I just recently spoke with a neighbor of mine here in Teaneck. And he was an employee of public service. And we were just talking about, you know, the neighborhoods and how they changed and everything. And he said that in East Orange, there was a time, and I think it may have been within maybe 10 years ago, that there was only one block in the whole town that was white. One. And he said that on that particular block in East Orange, if one person, so maybe they had 10 houses on this block. He didn't mention the name of the block. He just said one block. So let's just say 10 houses. If Mr. Smith was selling one of those houses, then everybody, all the other 9 people on that block chipped in and bought Mr. Smith's house because they wanted to make sure it was only sold to another white family.
oh my God.
Yeah, now I never heard that before.
No.
So, but you know, there's all kinds of ways to maneuver around it, and so I mean, I'm sure I know it happens. I know, you know where it happens the most? In Lakewood with the
Oh my-
Hasidic community.
Yes.
They buy houses up before anybody else can even look at another house. You have to be Hasidic to buy a house in a lot of those towns down there in Lakewood.
Yes. But
Yeah.
but Lakewood is a divided town, ain't it?
It's part of it, yes. Part of it is it's mostly all Hasidic, but there are parts of it that are just maybe a little white, a little black, a little Spanish, you know.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
But that's the way the Hasidic community operates. When somebody's selling a house, they want only another Hasidic family to buy it.
Right. No,
Yeah,
I don't understand it. I mean, I can understand some other states discriminating, but with a state like ours, you know, and
Yeah.
and the thing is that there's not much to do when you're a renter. You don't really have much rights, do you, as a renter, do you, Helen?
In what regard?
In terms of you wanted something fixed in your apartment or the owner doesn't want to fix it, you know? I ran into a problem like that before owning my home. And, you know, I reached out to your counsel
Mhm.
and I did get some advice, but it's basically, I didn't have much to go on to try to get him to
Yeah.
fix it.
Well, sometimes it is very, very difficult. But what I always tell people when they call with those types of questions, I always say, you have rights as a tenant and the landlord has rights as a landlord. You absolutely have rights and they absolutely have rights. Now, trying to get those rights exercised, that's another issue. But what I usually tell tenants to do we don't handle, well, I shouldn't say that we don't handle landlord-tenant issues. We do, but we're not a landlord-tenant organization. But because we get so many calls, we can respond to some of those questions. So what I generally tell people is if you have a, let's say, an infestation of, mice or bugs or something, and you're trying to get it corrected and the landlord will not correct it, or if you're like, let's say you're not getting your heat or something like that, what you could do as a tenant, you could go to your local Superior Court. So in West Orange or East Orange, it would be, I guess, Newark, right? That's Essex County.
Yeah, you mean the county clerk's office?
Yeah, you go to the county courthouse and you file a complaint with the county Superior Court. And each court has a landlord tenant. And it's like small claims court, basically.
Yeah, right.
And like, so what like one of your options would be so if you needed an exterminator, I needed an exterminator in my house last week. It cost me $300, that I had obviously had to pay for because it's my own house. But if I have this infestation in my apartment and the landlord won't fix it and I have to pay $300, then I'm going to deduct that from the rent. But you have to do it in courts. You can't
Right.
just rent. You have to go to the court. You have to say, here's my rent for August, and I want you to hold it because I want to file a complaint against the landlord because they're not fixing this and they're not getting rid of the bugs and they're not getting rid of the rodents. And until all that stuff is fixed, they're not going to get their rent until you order them to fix this stuff, and then they'll get their rent. So they have
Right.
to go back to court then to get their rent.
Right.
Yeah,
Wow.
Yeah. So that's the way, that's an option that you have. With the pandemic, though, it's been very difficult because the courts were closed.
Yeah. Are they still closed, Helen?
As far as I know, they're still closed. Yeah, I believe they're still closed. Yeah. So, but
Okay.
yeah, so they're closed as far as I know. I think that they're getting ready to reopen though.
Right.
And I think that the moratorium is being lifted now. It was a moratorium on evictions for the last year and a half or so. You couldn't evict somebody if they didn't pay their rent. But
Right.
I believe the moratorium is beginning to be lifted now.
Right. I see.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. Helen, can you give me a number on just a rough estimate on the number of apartments that is needed in New Jersey? Housing there's a real shortage of housing.
Yeah. Well, in Hackensack, our office is in Hackensack. And from about, let's see, this is 2021, I would say starting at around 2018, we've had probably about, I'll say 10,000 units built in Hackensack. Give or take. But every one of those units are over $2,000.
Oh, God.
Every one of them. They're all luxury apartments. Every one of them is a luxury apartment. So they're building them. The question is, the people, they're not building them. They're not building affordable housing. They're building these buildings to get the influx from the New York City people who don't want to spend $5,000 a month for rent. They can afford to spend $2,000. But
Right.
then they commute. But in New York City, the same apartment, maybe even smaller, would be $7,000.
Right.
That's the market that they're appealing. They're appealing to the sort of the, the young professional person
Exactly.
who's, maybe a married couple that their combined income is $150,000 and they're both professionals and the only thing that they have is a dog. They don't have kids. They only have dogs. That's it.
Right.
They don't want to have kids nowadays. They only want to have dogs. So, and I have nothing against dogs, but they don't want kids. Yeah.
Helen, when I was growing up, when I was in my teenage years, I remember when the federal government would build housing, would build these, these buildings with 20 floors but that has gone away, hasn't it?
Yes, yes.
The
Yeah.
federal government is not into the business of, it's allowing the private sector to try to create more apartments for low income people.
Yes. Well, what it transcended into is back in around the 80s, they had what was called the Mount Laurel ruling.
Yes.
And that was to address affordable housing. And it was to address affordable housing in more of a minority areas. So the original case, it was a group of people in Mount Laurel, New Jersey, sued the town because the developer was not they were only putting in, like at the time, high-end units. And they weren't taking into account the fact that there was a disproportionate amount of units that were going up for that particular community that would address the minority community that were in a lower income bracket. So that's how all of that started. So ever since now that went to the Supreme Court, the state Supreme Court, and the towns, every town in New Jersey, it was ordered to produce or provide a certain amount of affordable units. So now what happens, so instead of the federal government building these big apartment complexes that were basically like projects, they said it's better to put families, rather than put them into like a project where everybody in that building is of low income. Let a low income family move into an area or a community or a building that's a high end community, but certain units are going to be set aside for affordable.
Oh,
Yeah.
I see.
So now every community in New Jersey, if the developer wants to build an apartment complex, and let's say he wants to build 1,000 units, in order for the developer to get approval, they have to put aside 10% of those units. So if
Right.
they have 1,000 units, they have to put aside 100 units that are going to be for affordable families. And so now the children, so if you build an affordable unit in Tenafly, New Jersey, then if you're only making $30,000 a year, and that building is housing apartments that are really designed for people that are making $130,000 a year, those children are still going to get to go to school in Tenafly. They're going to be integrated into a community where they have better opportunities. So it's more of like a vision for the whole development of the families, so that they're not stuck in these low income housing that just breed, the schools aren't that good and the neighborhoods
Yeah.
run down, and it's just on and on and on and on and on, you know? So it seems to be working. We work with a couple of management companies that, and all they do is manage these affordable properties. There's one it's in Princeton. It's called Piazza and Associates. And Piazza and Associates, they manage a lot of the affordable units in New Jersey.
Right,
And so the problem is, there's not enough of them.
right.
You
That's
know,
true.
there's not enough to, you know, to
Yeah.
house.
That's true.
You know, the demand is, you know, off the charts. For every one apartment that is going to be set aside, there might be 500 applicants for one apartment.
Wow,
Yeah.
that's
So
a
it's-
lot. That's
Yeah,
a
it's
lot.
very difficult,
Yeah.
very difficult.
Wow.
And that's not even counting seniors. That's
Yeah.
another whole group of people that don't have affordable housing.
You know, I have, and I like to finish with this particular point, but my auntie was living with me in the beginning of the pandemic because she, you know, she finished her lease and she was looking for a place to stay. And I said, sure, you know, stay with me. And when she began her quest to find an apartment, well, she's a retired nurse, you know, she had some income, but it was all the things that she had to go through, you know, they
Yeah.
needed to see, they needed to see income, you know, they needed to see
Yes.
this. It was really, really, really difficult,
Yes.
really difficult. She must have looked at, I don't even know the number, but it was really, it's
Yes.
discouraging. It's discouraging.
It's actually easier to buy a house than it is to rent an apartment.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right.
It is. If you
Yeah,
can, I mean, if you could get a bank loan, but you know, if you qualify for a mortgage, then you could just go, you know, and look for a house.
Yeah,
But the apartments, they scrutinize every little thing.
Yeah.
They're highly
Exactly.
scrutinized,
exactly.
you know.
Helen,
And some of it might be to filter out people that might not be considered as desirable as someone else. So they make the requirements so stringent that, and if you don't meet that requirement, then they have a right to say, I'm sorry, as a
Yeah.
business decision, we're decided not to rent this apartment to you.
yes. No, I mean, the only reason why I found an apartment with, you know, my large family is because the owner wanted to get rid of the tenant.
Mhm.
It could have been that I would have still kept on looking for an apartment, but I got lucky. I just got lucky.
Yes. Right.
It's, you know, here in New Jersey, oh my God, it's very,
Yeah.
very difficult.
Yeah, it is. It's very difficult. Yes.
Well, Helen, I want to thank you again. I don't know if Colleen, do you have any questions? No, I don't know if she does. Well, I want to thank you, Helen. I don't know if you have any,
My
if you
pleasure.
have any last minute, you know, words you like to state.
Well, sure. I mean, obviously, you know, anytime that you have any, that you personally have any questions, or if you have, if you're in the company of people through the library services, they're always welcome to call.
Yes,
When the pandemic is over, and people start to feel comfortable, I'd be happy to come down and do a
Okay.
little person,
okay,
maybe in 6 months or something. We'll see how it goes.
sure. What I'll do,
Day, because maybe
Yeah.
more people come in during the day. That would
yes,
be good as well.
okay, Helen, we
Yeah.
can try that. I don't want to forget you, and I think this is something that we should be doing quite frequently, especially in this state.
Yes,
because
good.
everybody's, yeah,
Yeah, everybody needs to know what their rights are.
yes,
Yes.
yes,
And as I say, a lot of people don't really don't know what their rights are, and they really are floundering around. And it just creates a lot of instability in families and things like that. I mean, the most stabilizing aspect of a family's life is their home.
yes,
And if you don't have a home life that you could be comfortable in, it's very difficult.
very difficult, Helen, very.
Yes. So that's what we like to do. We like to see families in stable living environments.
Yes.
So,
Well, Helen, I think we can close this first chapter in this, hopefully this long discussion that we're gonna have, hopefully very soon.
okay.
I want to
you
thank you,
for
Helen.
inviting me. I
No,
appreciate it.
no, I constantly think about your organization because I remember calling and you guys gave me sound advice. And I know within my own family, there's plenty of people that are clueless to some of their rights as tenants. And I think
Right.
it's important to inform the citizens of all communities in New Jersey, because in every community, there are all sorts of people with different incomes. And
Oh, absolutely.
so, you got rich, you got poor, they all live together and, try to make the best of it, make the best of it.
Absolutely.
Well,
Right.
anyway, I'd like to finish off here, Helen, and I wish you a good evening.
Thank you very much, Jose.
No,
as well.
thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
And yes, and I'll be putting your flyer up on our bulletin board for anybody who might have concerns that, they can call you and ask for advice.
Okay, sounds good. All right, take care.
All right, Helen, good night.
Good night.
Good night, Helen.
Good night.
Good night, Colleen. Oh, look, I don't know what happened to her.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye, Helen. Bye-bye.